Born in China in 1905 to an English diplomat, he was educated like many of his generation in boarding schools back in England. Hiller pursued a business career, studying economics at Cambridge, but on the death of his father, his long-held desire to pursue a career as an artist was achieved. In 1926, he attended the Slade, studying under Henry Tonks, before heading to Paris, where he studied under André Lotte. In Paris, Hiller was able to meet many of the members of the Surrealist movement, a severe shift away from the academic and Cubist teachings he had had previously. He was particularly influenced by the works of Giorgio de Chirico and Max Ernst, whose quiet and cooler treatment of Surrealism was quite different to that of the other members of the Surrealist movement. From the 1930s, he developed his distinct style of work. With their contemplative stillness and cool austerity, they present a dreamlike, often bleak world of empty streets, deserted seashores strewn with debris, and country lanes where it is forever winter. Compared to European surrealists like Dali, Hiller's take is decidedly English, reserved and understated. Apart from the war years, when he served in the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, Hiller spent most of his life in France and Spain, before returning to England in the early 1950s. Married twice, he died in Bristol in 1983. When we look at Tristram Hiller, it's his use of scale that creates some of the underlying tension, discomfort, underlines the questions that we start to ask ourselves about the scenes that we're looking at. And it's the way that he uses scale, his subtle use of changing the size of things in relation to one another, that they're not quite right. If you look at the pictures of his, often the figures are just ever so slightly too small for the buildings. Or if you look at some of the maritime ones, that there's propellers in the background of ships that are far too big to fit on any of the boats that are in the picture, or anchors that are not to scale. So it's that playing with the size of things within the picture that gives, as I said, that sense of uneasiness. And it's very subtle what he does. So, I mean, here's a photograph just near me of the wool scourers on the Bowen River. And I'm using that just as a basis to work with. And it's not to draw it exactly as I see it like this in the photograph. That's what he does. He sort of takes elements of a scene or of a landscape that he's looking at and puts them all into it. And doesn't necessarily leave things in their correct spaces. So, I mean, when I look at this picture of the wool scourers, I might not worry about so much the hill aspect. Actually, I overemphasize the hill aspect, actually. So we could give it that maybe we've come down to a much lower viewpoint, like so. And I quite like the arrow there on the road. So I'm just going to take, as I said, some elements like this, and you start to just play with some of them. He's also, as I said, playing with that idea of scale. So it might be that in situations like this that we can start to keep the scale of the building large, and that it dramatically changes in scale as it goes further away. Okay, you can start to maybe see some of these things starting to play out. You can see there's a little bit of a landscape behind. We might pull up the horizon line. Get some of those hills and things happening like so. Darken up those trees. We've got something starting to happen like that. Now the other beautiful element within the photograph that I showed you before is that you might have been able to see the top of one of the chimneys. It might be that he would move and that the chimney maybe only looked small. So we might make it quite a larger chimney, for instance. And another nice element that was in it was the power lines. And again, we can change maybe their scale. To do some odd things like that. Last, you'd either leave it unpopulated by any figures. Oh, the other nice one is the 60 sign there, actually. I could see him moving it, maybe into a position like this. You could put some type of figure. Again, it's sort of they've got to not feel correct in terms of the scale. So these are some of the elements that you could be playing with. Is that taking elements from a landscape that you've either drawn previously and overemphasize them, change the scale of them in relation to other parts, make things bigger, smaller, etc. To create then that sense of unsettledness. Work this up as a drawing to begin with, maybe like this, before further working in some of the other elements that I'll get you to do. Thinking back to some of the earlier exercises that we've done, so that you might start to incorporate the flat colour washes of John Sell Cotman, with the working those flat washes in some of the ideas of saturated and desaturated colour, like in Winifred Nicholson. You can start to see here, and that's what I was conscious about in this one, incorporating some of that single point perspective, like we discussed with Van Gogh. We could also have started to maybe work with some of the structure of dynamic symmetry, like Grace Crowley. So this week's exercise is to come up with a picture using the element of scale, like Tristram Hiller, to feed into that feeling, that surrealist mode of everything not being necessarily as it seems, that somewhat dreamlike state. I want you to also start to think about, as I said before, incorporating some of the other things that we've done from previous weeks. So you could be using the flat washes or the flat colour, like what we looked at in Tristram Hiller, which we looked at with John Sell Cotman, and which would be appropriate for when you look at Tristram Hiller. His colour's often very flat. And also, though, but using maybe some of the dynamic colour aspects of complementary colours and things that we looked at with Grace Cossington Smith, or some of the elements of Winifred Nicholson. You can also be thinking, particularly probably what's important is that linear or one-point perspective that we looked at with Van Gogh. Again, when you look at a lot of Tristram Hiller's work, they are very much based around the structure of single-point perspective. They are quite severe in some cases, that one-point perspective. As always, good luck with this exercise, and I look forward to seeing what you do.